Hello, and welcome to the show. This is just a short intro before we begin the episode, which I'm sure you will enjoy. We have a few things to share which are specials this weekend. If you're a writer and love the process and inspiration of writing on a classic typewriter, you can experience this magic opportunity by purchasing your very own typewriter. We do also have vintage or antique typewriters. Or if you already have a typewriter and it's broken, we are able to repair it so that your writing process can be that much more beautiful and enjoyable. Whether you're sitting at home or a cafe or traveling the world, you can now be motivated to write anywhere, anytime. Next, staying on the topic of writing. If you would like to purchase my phone book, they are now published and available. The Narcissist Recovery Guidebook, as well as the Grand Soul Awakening calendar collection of inner child poems on friendship and healing, as well as Divine Love Lessons, a poetic love story of returning back to your core self and a human journey of understanding your higher calling, which has a touch of synchronicity, numerology, ascension patterns, spiritual insights to soothe the consciousness and support the ego into pure, authentic soulhood. And it's a great gift for yourself or for a friend who appreciates the art of poetry and story. Next, you can order the personalized art painting, which is perfect for birthday gifts and holidays. And it's just a great opportunity to become creative and to inspire like younger generation or adults as well. And you can also decide which kind of art this is, which can be seasonal or biblical or a Disney character. So it's really anything that inner child was find for. Next, tutoring is also available from grade school to middle school to high school to courses. We have both the math, reading, writing, essay help, resume help, college admissions, essay help, all kinds of tutoring. Last but not least, we have virtual ballet lessons and classes available for all ages and all levels. There are ballet bar workouts included, and all you need is just a little bit of space and a chair or something to hold on to. And this is going to be with accompanying classical orchestra music to bring a sense of levity and joy and just fun overall, while also strengthening the body and adding flexibility and grace to your daily posture. And I have a unique experience as I grew up performing at Lincoln Center with the York City Ballet, with my City Ballet, with Alvin, Ailey, American Dance Theater, and also at Madison Square Garden. So this unique mix of artistic expression has inspired me to create a whole list of ballet choreography, ballet classes, and to inspire people to come along on the journey to awaken their appreciation and their gratitude for body movement and body positivity. And I'm excited to share this with everybody, and everybody is open to join. It's available for everybody. And we focus on creating elegant movement to the rhythm of the music, which makes you feel comfortable in your own space, at your own pace, and in your own skin. And this gives you an opportunity to enjoy the journey of imagination, beauty, integration, and for you a sense of gratitude for yourself, for others, for music, and for movement. Classes are in session and all are. And if you would like to have me on as a guest on your podcast and would like to be a guest on my podcast, please do let me know. And I am also collecting new interviews with upcoming. And for information on any of the things that I have mentioned, if you would like to participate in, or to purchase, or to just join the community, please send me an email at growthandgracemindset@gmail.com. I have all of the logistics are on Great. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Growth, Grace, and Gratitude podcast. We'll talk about all things mental health, wellness, positive psychology, inner child healing, spirituality, and so much more. And today we have a special guest, and we will be discussing a little bit about mysticism, tarot, and the art of poetry with Julia Gordon-Bramer, who is a professional tarot card reader, Sylvia Plath scholar, and author of 5 books, most recently Tarot Life Lessons and the Occult Sylvia Plath, both published with Inner Traditions Destiny Books. She has been reading tarot for over 46 years, is a student and teacher of A Course in Miracles and Ho'oponopono and studies Kabbalah, Taoism, Buddhism, and Mysticism. Wow, that's so amazing. Welcome to the podcast. Actually, welcome back because we had Julia on our podcast when we were doing audio. So now it's nice to do like a face to face.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
yes, of course. And I love the topic of mysticism, especially now as we actually do have Halloween coming up. And I think it's a great kind of like interesting reminder to a lot of spiritual people who are into this world of like mysticism. And I think it's an interesting time because I do think the divine feminine is even kind of gifted a sense of spiritual potential to like tune in between the veils or beyond the veils of this
Yeah.
time. Do you think there's something kind of like more mystically within the Halloween season cycle?
Well, I mean, it is a wrap up. The season is changing and it's about kind of going into the darkness, right? And into that, the more introspective time. So certainly with Samhain and some of the Wiccan practices, and pagan practices, I can see that. I like the word mysticism better than occult because, I mean, the occult just means hidden, right? So, like, we have our occult phases of the moon, but it seems to conjure things that frighten people. Good with Halloween, you hear the word occult a lot around Halloween. But mysticism is more about divinity, and it's about finding that higher self and the God path. And so yeah, um, I like mysticism better.
Yeah, totally, totally. And I like how you actually sort of quote on your page that I wrote down, and you said from some Alexander, and it says the best teachers are those who show you where to look, but don't tell you what to see. And I thought that was so profound and so
Um,
amazing. And it actually connects with the quote that I was preparing for this conversation that I didn't even realize you posted this. And this quote, it says, a starry sky is equally interesting to a scientist, a mystic, an ethics scholar, and a poet. Looking at the stars, each experiences something different, and each sees his own picture. And this is from Aliha Izzet Begovic. This is who was a president of Bosnia and a philosopher and author. So I think this kind of like connection is so beautiful, and it's
mm,
also a beautiful,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
such a,
I just had a conversation. I mean, within minutes, I just hung up from talking to a person who I also met on Twitter. And I would call him an amateur theologian. And he was talking about God's perspectives and that, Yahweh means I am. And God encompasses all. And his example to me, which I found so fascinating and right on the point, was, if we cut ourselves and we look and we say, "Oh, I'm bleeding," right? And it's just this loss of blood, whatever. Like we don't have necessarily sorrow over it or something. But to change perspective, and if you're a red blood cell, watching the red blood cell next to you dying, that's like it's a trauma. The same thing, right? I thought that was great. Like,
yeah,
and this is God is all views and all things, and so what he and I were talking about was when people challenge that there is no God, that big view is much more removed than the experiential view. And we're looking at it always, and God is always. So God cares very much in the personal view, and not at all in the universal view, where man is just a blip in time, all our entire existence. So it's fascinating, and this is what mysticism teaches us, is to look through different views, right?
Yes, exactly. It's so true. And I remember when I was first going through like inner child healing and the journey of like ascension and learning more about myself and parts of my shadow self even. And I remember somebody introduced me to the mandala, and people go, no, it's kind of like an esoteric, like a diagram, and it's a different kind of geometrical configuration of symbols. And this kind of spiritual tool is such a great thing to help us with seeing like those different multidimensional puzzle pieces. It's like kind of like a maze. And I feel like being like a mystic, it's kind of like looking at the world as a maze in a way, because there are so many different potentials, there are different possibilities and timelines. And we do have a perspective of our past self, current self, and our potential future self. So it's
Yes.
like, it's so interesting to see which way we will go based on, there's so many things, right? It's like based on either we're like kind of following our gut or instinct, sometimes overly relying on our wounds, maybe if we're not able to kind of heal them. It's such an interesting journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that past, present, and future potential self, um, again, it's a whole different perspective. Because if we're in the past, the Buddhists say if you're in the past, you're depressed, and because you're just reflecting, you're not living anymore. You're just going backwards. And if you're in the future, you're anxious and panicky and anticipatory at best. And so the only place of peace is right here, right now.
It's so true, yes. And what are some of your favorite kind of like mysticism practices? It's kind of like connecting to meditation, right? Is that a good one?
Yeah. Ho'oponopono, for those who don't know, is ancient Hawaiian mysticism, and it's really a forgiveness practice. And it's funny, I get called to it sort of back and forth, and in the last month I've been really called to it again. And so I'm just being very clear. I mean, it's basically a mantra of like four things. It's saying, I'm sorry, because we're all taking responsibility in every relationship we have, even if we think the other person did us wrong. It can be hard to do this, but to find your role in it. So you say, I'm sorry, I forgive you, I love you, and thank you. And those four things in any order, to meditate on those and really feel them through the other person, can be very healing for yourself and for the other person. I really think with our oneness, with our connection, the other people that we're interacting with, positive and negative, they do feel our work. Whether they agree with our work or not, whether they want to choose to fix their lives, whole other thing. But I think they can feel it.
I love that. That's such an interesting point, and how you mentioned like you go towards some phrases, like you're pulled into them sometimes more than others. And I think it's so true because like sometimes when we're healing our wounds or we feel that we experienced somebody hurt us through betrayal, and when we're healing that kind of pain muscle, or it's like we feel inclined to go to the forgiveness aspect, and maybe that's like a little bit painful, but once we get to that, it feels like so healing and so beautiful. And
Yeah,
then when we kind of go towards a different version of ourselves and we're able to say like I love you to yourself, it's like that's so
right.
beautiful too. So I like how you mentioned there are different phases of healing and helping us meditate through that.
And it's all about us, right? It's all our experience. So like, I like to tell my clients, if I call you a name, Ari, um it's up to you how you process that. So just for fun, I could say, Ari, you are such a duck. And you would be like, right, right, it's laughter, right? Like you don't relate to a duck. It doesn't mean anything to you. So that probably wouldn't bother you. You probably would be like, okay, Julia, whatever, you know. But if I say, Ari, you're an idiot, and that hurts you, well, the fact of the matter is, in both cases, just words out of my mouth. And I could just as soon call you my coffee cup or a bottle of water or my tarot deck, you know? And whatever I call you doesn't mean anything. It's unless you decide to internalize it and take it in. So I had an experience not too long ago where somebody called me, somebody I had a lot of love for, called me kind of a nasty name. And, you know, I've been processing it because initially it did not hurt because I know he's full of crap, you know, and I don't own it. But just the fact that he would say that, you know, affected the relationship in a significant way. Will the relationship go on? Probably not, you know. And that's me having my boundaries. I can still do the forgiveness work and have boundaries. You know, I can still say, all right, I realize you're a troubled person and I love you and I'm sorry. And that hurts me. And it hurts me what we went through together. But I'm not going to get hurt again, you know? And that's where we're both living in our spirit side and the real world side, you know?
Yes, exactly. And that's such a great point. And it's also really important to take those boundaries. And I feel like so many people, especially like who are empaths, and their kindness, you know, overflows and they feel sometimes even guilty or they feel
Right.
overly responsible for pleasing people. So actually putting up your boundaries in those cases when there is constant or like consistent disrespect,
Yeah.
that's a good thing. And we do have to do it. It doesn't make us any less. It just actually makes us more empowered because like we're seeing the truth and we're taking those action steps to protecting ourselves, and that's totally normal. We should be.
Right. Like this meanness of this former friend um has built me stronger.
Right.
And while I hate the lesson, really do, wish it never happened, you know, I know that I'm better today than I was a month ago, you know? So, so that's something. And yeah, I just think as empaths, as spiritual people, we put a lot of baggage on ourselves, like we have to be love and light, we have to be happy, we have to radiate positivity at all times, and that's just not the human experience, you know. And we're all growing and learning, and so I think talking about it and maybe sharing our journey through to love and light, that's where we need to be. But we're not all going to be love and light all the time. Things are going to piss me off, you know?
Yes, and that's actually healthy and natural because we come here to the polarized earth, and this is the space where we're going to have to see kind of two extremes, you know, and through that journey, we're kind of taking accountability, and it's even like how we prioritize ourselves on the journey. That's also what matters because when people do hurt us and cause us emotional trauma, emotional pain, it's kind of it reminds us like, oh, okay, so I have to kind of take a step back and see how people are just observe like the normal observation of humans. And we go, okay, this is happening, so I have to just respond accordingly. And because some of us go through things and we're not polite, we're not kind, and the people don't want to have that conversation to deepen the relationship, to deepen the friendship, then you have to be like, oh, okay, so am I even aligned in this kind of situation? Is it gonna
Yeah.
benefit me? Like, if it's a friendship, it so often happens that we go through our healing cycle and we kind of evolve past a lot of friendships, and that is so painful. And it's also painful to see that because we're witnessing something that kind of confirms that we are shifting and maybe somebody else currently is not. So it does cause a little bit of pain.
Right. Right. When
Yeah.
we're shifting, we want everyone to shift with us, and that's not always the case.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so true, totally. And you're writing about Sylvia Plath,
Mm.
and that's a really deep topic, especially because so many people who do write poetry go through a lot of mental health integrations and like depression cycles. I know a lot of friends who are so deeply poetic and beautiful in their poetry. And when they were writing and creating, I feel like they were almost channeling from a higher dimension because they
Oh,
were
I'm sure they are.
yeah,
I think that's the creative experience, and you don't have to have any faith at all. If you're a creative person, you've tapped into it. I see musicians playing and they're lost in their music. I see artists, painting and they're in the zone. Writers who go all day and forget to eat. And I've been one of them while I was writing the Occult Sylvia Plath, especially. But yeah, it's just part of it. um I mean, God said I am, right? God is the creative energy, and God is a creative force. And so if God is creation of the universe and all things within the universe, and we're alive and we're a part of that, when we create, we get to tap into that God power, and that's just it's the best high there is.
it's so true. What was your favorite part about writing about her?
About Sylvia Plath.
Yeah,
um wow, favorite part, wow. I mean, it's been a journey. And as far as Sylvia Plath goes, when I was in graduate school, I first started noticing a lot of tarot card imagery in her work, and it was just incredible. Nobody had seen it before. I brought it to the attention of my professor, and I said, "Look, here she's actually mentioning the tarot in her poem Daddy, when she says, in my tarot pack, tarot being another name for tarot." And it went on and on. And I showed him, this reference and this reference, and he looked at me and he was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he said, "Make that your semester end project." And that really became my life's work. And
wow,
so what I identified was in her book of poems, Ariel, which it was published posthumously after her death, but it was ready to go on her desk, and this book, what Plath had done was she took one set of words and she gave each poem of the 40 poems. Each poem has a minimum of 6 different meanings,
wow,
depending on the perspective. And that, getting back to that God perspective, right? That I am. She was a genius's genius. Now, me as a poet, I'm a fairly accomplished poet. I don't have a book of poetry yet. I have a lot of unpublished, almost full collections, and one day I'll get to that. But I've just been publishing more important things. But I've published a lot of single poems and won quite a few awards. And I've done some things with double meaning. I've even done some things with triple meaning, but never on the scale that Plath did, sextuple meaning, over and over and over to such perfection. Really, it's astounding. I mean, as a poet, what she could do with words. But then, of course, God said, "I am the Word," and I think I think writers know this. That the truly creative writer knows that that's God, that's the point of creation, and that words have so much power, and that they are in fact spells, and that they mesmerize and charm the readers in their different ways.
that
So
is
yeah, so it's kind of my job, I think. I think the reason I'm here on this planet is to redeem her, and to show that Sylvia Plath was so much more than just a depressive. which is that box that they insist on putting her in. And academia really dislikes me, by the way. First of all, I don't play their game. I didn't get a PhD. I have an MFA, but that's not quite good enough. And I didn't get a PhD, and I'm not regurgitating the same old stuff.
Right.
And they have careers built on the same old stuff, of course. So I'm a little bit of a rabble rouser, and it's my job to break that up a bit. And I'm having a real good time doing it.
That's fantastic. That's so amazing. Yeah, I love how you mentioned that whole oneness and I am. And I think that that's why a lot of people are also kind of returning to religion and the mysticism through there, because like through those stories, there's also kind of divine messengers and there's dreams and prophecy and so many different biblical realms are kind of coming to light, and people feel a connection and a recurring timeline that brings them back to study or to learn or to connect back to part of their ancestral spiritual self. So it's such an interesting way to like access knowledge and connect to the possible higher thought throughout the universe.
Yeah. Well, these are such polarizing times. And I think that there's a huge movement right now toward atheism. And I would go beyond that because, it's funny. Plath called herself an atheist, but most people say she was the most spiritual atheist ever. She just wasn't acknowledging like a man in the throne in the sky. But she very much was in tune with spirit and Kabbalah and alchemy and the oneness. And I have absolute evidence of that. And I think getting back to us in these times, you know, the so-called atheists, this big movement, they're really nihilists, and they're really quite miserable people. And so we're seeing the division is really getting into dark light, and it can be quite ugly and frightening sometimes. But I think, and I don't even want to say, because I know good people on both sides. I say both because it seems like there's only two now. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have even said that. But, but I know, right? But what I can say is that there are the people who are consumed with anger and darkness and ugliness, and they're spewing out vile slurs against others and vitriol. And then there are those who are choosing to not get sucked into the propaganda and the media, and we're going to live in love and light. And, whatever. You can call me, naive, putting on my rose colored glasses. I always say, how's that working for you? All that hate. Um, it's a strange time, but we're really being called to stand up and be the light, and I think it's essential right now. And I think that we just need to be the source, and we need that word atonement. A Course in Miracles, which I teach and study, it breaks atonement up to at one man, and it's all about coming back to the source, coming that we have to forgive, because we wouldn't cut off a hand or an arm on the body of humanity. We wouldn't do it because we're one. And so it's about healing, not hating, and that's where we have to be.
That's so beautiful, and it's so funny. I was just going to ask you, what advice would you give to somebody who's like a teenager right now, and you just had the most beautiful message and guidance, because it's so true. It's like there are so many narratives out there, and sometimes when an insecure teenager, when we were all teenagers, we were insecure at times. We didn't know who to
It's
believe, who to
it's
trust.
what being a teenager is about.
Exactly, exactly. And then when we are fed certain narratives that are like expecting a response or reaction from us, it's also like peer pressure. It's another version of peer pressure. So it's hard on the teens and it's hard for them because they also want to be part of the crowd, they want to be part of the team, and they have to
Mm.
kind of, as difficult as it is, sometimes they have to choose a team, whether they're in school or at work. That's the
Right.
difficult part of it when they actually have to
Well,
kind of like,
everybody wants to be cool. I mean, at that age, that's just, so important. So you're gonna take on whatever the cool thing is. And we all know what's going on today with that. And so, I think we're really because media's gotten to be such a part of it now, it's going to be a very confused generation coming up, I think. But I would like to think that maybe they're smarter than we're giving them credit for, and maybe, um, something beautiful is going to come out of this. That's what I'm praying for. Um, right now, it's kind of scary, but
yeah,
I don't want to live in the illusion.
that's right. That's the mysticism. It's like the balancing of like the delusion versus the truth. It's like, where do we find that balance?
Yeah, right, exactly. And A Course in Miracles says, which I keep by my side all the time, it says
Of you,
really at base there are only two things. There's love and there's fear, and fear does not exist. So
so
I
beautiful.
love it. Yeah, I love that. That's what I would tell the kids. There's only love and fear, and the fear isn't real, does not exist. It's in our heads.
Yes, yes, exactly. And it's also when sometimes teenagers actually go through their like spiritual awakening and then they start seeing those polarities and they start seeing all the lies that they have been fed, and that awakening is such a like eye-opening experience that they start to kind of like you mentioned atonement, that they start to go through a deep cleansing of the body. That's when many people become minimalists and they start to kind of like detach from all that toxicity and all of those timelines that were feeding them based on fear. So it's so true.
Yeah.
They find people find others and they try to either be a light or a source of darkness. And I guess it's everybody's responsibility to try to see the truth as best as we all can.
Yeah. I don't think most people go out consciously saying, I'm going to be a source of darkness. We have some, we have those
So,
devil worshipping kind of, gothy, occultists. Um, but in general, I think it's more either I'm going to be a conscious light, or I'm going to do my own thing, and my friends and Instagram and TikTok are more important than anything. And and so they're just lost in the numbness
yeah,
of whatever the world is throwing at them, so they don't know they're in the darkness, but they're manipulated, and they're chasing something outside themselves to be happy, not doing any inner work.
yeah. And what advice would you give your teenage self?
Oh, my teenage self. Wow. That's something. I mean, I had an interesting teenage journey because as a kid, I was, and I wrote about this in my book, Tarot Life Lessons, which I think I talked to you about the first time I talked to you, maybe, or maybe not. I don't know. Uh, but,
Oh,
uh, but,
ooh.
I was a very mystical kid, and I grew up in the Episcopal Church, but it wasn't a normal Episcopal church because I was taught things, on church retreats, they taught us automatic writing and they taught us meditation. And in my church, they spoke in tongues. And so it was a little different. They called it charismatic Christian back then. And so that was all very much a part of me as I became a teenager. Um, but like most psychics, of which I've been given that label. I wear it a little uncomfortably because I think everyone is psychic to different degrees, and I think it's about teaching yourself to pay attention. But like most psychics, I was considered oversensitive, and by a lot of family and friends, and I didn't exactly know what to do with all of my feelings, and there is no instruction manual for this. Well, there are some today, actually, but back in the 1970s, you couldn't tell me to go read a book by Sonia Choquette or something. So, so
Wow.
I,
Yeah.
yeah, I did what a lot of kids in the 70s did, and as I did a lot of drugs and alcohol. And so I developed a problem with that as I grew older. I was fortunate enough to quit when I got pregnant at 22. So I really went through my whole addiction phase very young, through it completely and out the other end, which was awesome. um you know Talking to old Julia, I would say, I would have wished I didn't do that self-destructive thing at all, but I totally see the lessons I got. I see the development, and how I relate to, interestingly, other addicts. I was just talking with a friend of mine about this, that I tend to call a lot of addictive personalities into my life who, for whatever reason, they need to talk to me about it. They need to kind of test the waters of sobriety. And so I see how all of that was absolutely necessary in my growth, even though it was a painful time for me. But at 16 was also the time that I got my first tarot deck. It was also the time that I found Sylvia Plath. And so the year 16 was a very key year for me for whatever reason. Talked to a lot of other psychics, and I feel like most of us kind of come of age right around then, with our abilities anyway, having our first intuitions and premonitions, and getting our first decks or runes, or mapping our natal charts, or however we do it.
Totally. That's so beautiful. And it's like, yeah, that's like culturally our Sweet 16 is such a big thing. It's a huge like party day, and like that's a time when we feel so excited to be the center of attention, to be a princess. It's like we're just starting to tune into our feminine self more. So I think it's like a rite of
Right.
passage. It's such a beautiful moment in time where we
Right. Our
kind of are
bodies are
tuning into
changing.
our yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
And,
true.
I don't think that any teenager is really equipped to do deep spiritual work. I mean, there may be the odd exception, maybe Jesus Christ, but for most of us, I think most of us, our teens are kind of a training ground, and we're obsessed with our friends, we're obsessed with our boyfriends, we don't know who the heck we are, and we're trying on all kinds of different personalities. It's funny. I did a road trip this weekend, and I was listening to the autobiography of Billy Idol, and I was remembering back on my punk rocker days, but I had hippie days before that, and I had the new wave days after that. And then into the 80s, and it was like we're all just experimenting with fashion, with music,
Yep.
and today it's all a part of me. But but you know but i i needed i needed to have the phase of wearing safety pins in my clothes, and I needed and sneering at the grown-ups, and you know um and I needed the wild colors of the 80s, and the my punk rock, my new wave glasses that looked like slits, and it was all part of it, and spiritually kind of the same thing. I've had my phases of study. In my early 20s, I got very deep into Shakti Gawain and creative visualization, and that was when I found Wayne Dyer and began to read him. In my 30s, I began to get very serious about tarot. Um, in my 40s, I got into Kabbalah, I got into alchemy. Um, it's all evolved. I joined a Buddhist women's group. I began to read the Tao. That was probably around when I found A Course in Miracles. Really, I think my 40s, now that I'm saying it out loud, my 40s is when everything opened up, and continued into my 50s, and now I'm journeying into my 60s. I'm soon to be 61 next month. And
Wow,
and yeah,
beautiful.
I wonder what's ahead, you know.
It's so beautiful. What a beautiful kind of like amalgamation of all the journeys that you experience. I love how you share like experiencing like different fashion styles and playing with fashion, and it's such a huge part. Like even when we were kids, we were playing with like dolls or Barbies, and we were trying on clothes and kind of like figuring out our own identity through a
Right,
Barbie or through like a doll. And I think
right.
when we're just starting to kind of feel comfortable with ourselves, we're like, okay, let me try this and let me try that. That's the best feeling in the world because we're giving ourselves the freedom to play. And like that's how we connect our inner child. Our inner child loves to play. It's like it's the pure fun, the pure joy that we like give ourselves permission to do. I love that you mentioned that.
Yeah, you're the first person I've talked to about that now that I think of it. And that is cool. And
Amazing.
yeah, and I think, you know, our spiritual journey is not so different. Um, as a former humanities teacher, I have taught a lot of different religions, and I loved that. I loved teaching humanities because it's about humanity, right? And it's all the ways we come together and intersect, even if we do it very differently. Even if the Eastern brand is really different from the Western brand, one source. We may say in the Hindu religion that God has many avatars, you know, many faces, but it still gets down to one source, one God. And you know, over on the Western side, we can say Father, Son, Holy Spirit, or whatever, and everything in between. But again, it's the oneness, and it usually boils down to peace and love and these inherent values of morality and kindness, and you know, whether you want to call it the Ten Commandments or something different. Most of the great faiths have it, and they're mostly about that oneness and peace. And so I just think that's so beautiful, and I don't think religions have to contradict. I think we can say, if we're very dogmatic and we want to just be very hardline in a church, you know, and that's fine. Some people say there's only one way and it's my way. And you know, if you want to believe that, that's fine. And if you want to even teach that, good on you. You know, that I'm not going to embrace that, but I'm going to love a little bit from the Tao, and a little bit from maybe Catholicism, and a little bit from Buddhism, and a little bit from Hinduism, and you know, and wrap it all together in my system that's working for me. And I believe that God is bigger than that. God isn't going to put itself, I'll say, in a slot and say this is only me. You know, we learn God is the words I am. I am as all creation. I am as everything and every perspective. And I think that's damn cool.
Wow, that is so beautiful. I just feel like you expressed what a mystic is. It's like this is the path towards like trying to find spiritual clarity on such a dense journey as there's so many different avenues and paths to take and thinking
Mhm.
like which one is correct, which one is wrong. Like you mentioned, not everyone has to be correct or wrong. We have to kind of like see the parts that are inspiring to us and are resonating to us and connecting to parts of ourselves, our shadow selves, our inner child selves, our higher selves, and hopefully to kind of like find that groundedness and center of love and happiness.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's in all of us, and we can choose to do the work in this life or not, you know. And that's the hard thing. The hard thing is when you love someone and you're watching them not changing or growing and not doing the work, and you want to give them a nudge, and maybe they push back in a less than kind way. Or or sometimes they do grow with us, but we have to be okay with they'll get there when they get there, and it might not be this lifetime.
Yeah, that's such a great point. The inner kind of like maternal side in all of us feminines, the feminine women, they just want to be like nurturing and be like, here is a nurturing. Please take the message, okay? But like
Hmm.
people may respond well, or they may be completely rejected to that because maybe it's not their time to tune in. And I think
Right.
the most important part is that we gave it a good try because we do have also a responsibility to kind of like lead the way and be of service in a kind of higher pathway. And if we, put our foot down and we kind of like try to be that messenger and if we get rejected, that's fine. I feel like as long as we try, we can't really do anything more than
Right.
that sometimes. And
Right.
for that kind of like experience, it's also an awareness to be like you don't have to save everybody, which is very hard. But that superiority, the feeling, it just has to kind of like bring it back to yourself. And sometimes, where do you feel that maybe you want to shift yourself? Because
Mhm.
sometimes we want to be the hero so hard in somebody else's reality that sometimes we're missing something in our own realities. Maybe we do have to kind of
Uh-huh.
help ourselves shift. And
I think
interestingly enough, sometimes when we do shift, some people also like parallel shift.
sure. Well, when we feel that I hate using the buzzword trigger because I think it's just overused, but when we feel triggered, when we feel like a connection with someone, like, oh my God, I have to help this person. They're, gotta watch that. You have to realize that you're putting on them your beliefs that they can't manage their own life on their own, that you have to rescue or advise them. And you're also oftentimes putting all your happiness depending on them kind of coming round. And we can't get our happiness from other people. And I'm as guilty as anyone of doing that. I mean, we all do that sometimes, probably. And someone we love hurts us, and you say, you've wounded me. You've made my life bad in this way. And the truth is, it's how we chose to receive it, and whether we decide to grow from it or not. And it and that it and we all get hurt all the time, but yeah.
Yes, like yes, we as children we have that emotional dependency, codependency sometimes because as our inner child connects to that wound of feeling like rejected, neglected, it's totally natural. That inner child part is natural. So as long
Sure.
as we kind of see that and through the inner child, that's a great place to start. Even
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, to understand your triggers, if you weren't loved, if you were
yes,
abused, if you got no attention, whatever, to see how it comes up and plays out as an adult. And it's weird. I mean, I'm almost 61, like I said, and I'm still doing the work, and it's like, do we ever get there? I don't know. I hope so. I want to self-actualize enough that I don't have to keep these lessons going. And when I was a little kid, I used to listen. I've always loved George Harrison, and he has that song "Give Me Love," and he's got a line, "Keep me free from birth." And as a little kid, I didn't understand that, and I got really interested in it. And of course, it's really a Hindu reference about reincarnation, and you don't want to have to go through it over and over and over again. You want to do it all in this life and self actualize so that you're free from being born to do it all again. So that's what that line means, if anyone wondered.
yes, that's so interesting. Totally. Wow, what a beautiful conversation, really. I had such a great time. chatting with you, and I feel like listeners are going to get such a beautiful definition of mysticism and just to learn more about it and the whole journey of poetry, tarot, and the Sylvia Plath story, and kind of like just learning about what's beyond the veil. And where can people connect with you and also buy your book,
Yeah, yeah.
all your books?
Yes, yes. So my books are available at all major booksellers, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all of that, maybe even your local bookstores. And or you can
Amazing.
find me on juliagordonbramer.com, and that's JuliaGordonBramer.com. If you do audiobooks, Simon and Schuster is the publisher for the audiobook, and that's on Audible and all the major audiobook sellers. So I would, love that. I read them in my own voice. So, so some people, to some
Wow.
people that matters. To me, that matters. I couldn't stand the idea of someone else reading my books. I had to do my own words there. So yeah. Anybody who wants to reach me through my
Yes.
website, love to do a tarot card reading.
Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you so much again for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Ari. Great to be here. Take care.